This is the story of a good deed, made possible by the sheer determination of a handful of British conservationists. The curlew is Europe's largest wader, and their population is in rapid decline. In order to combat this decline, a plan was put in place to relocate from areas where their populations are stronger to areas where they have become locally extinct. With the hope of establishing new breeding populations. This plan is called the Head Start Project.
Curlew, at the moment in the UK, the Eurasian curlew is our most threatened species as far as conservation. It's an iconic bird with a big long beak. It's in decline mainly in the south of England, and we have a lot of things that we can do to help it. Habitat, it likes wetlands, it likes wader scrapes, it likes moorland, it likes the uplands. We're doing fairly well up here. The female is slightly bigger than the male and has the slightly longer bill. The female gives about 30% of her body weight to produce a small clutch of about 3 to 4 eggs. Because she's put too much of her body weight into producing the eggs, if they're predated or lost through disturbance, we lose the whole clutch. The chicks are born precocial, which means as soon as it comes out of the shell suit, it can run around like a teenager. It feeds itself, it doesn't need the parent bird to come back and feed it. They can live, we've had from BTO records of the leg rings that are put on some of the chicks, up to about 30. 6 weeks on the ground before it can fledge, it's also vulnerable at that stage. So predator control is an important part of it, educating the public to keep the dogs on a lead, keep the rights of way.
So here at Bolton we have a nice lot of curlews. We're quite unique that we have an overwintering population, and it's all down to the management. Being a sporting estate, we're managing the game birds, but due to the predator control that we carry out, the habitat management, our work with farmers, building up relationships, making them aware of where nests are, where chicks are, we can really look after them.
So yeah, ask any questions, the keepers that are chauffing you around, ask as many questions as you like.
Within the last few years we've had real problems with long dry periods and droughts, so we've added in ponds, so wader scrapes and ponds. Water's a lifeline for a lot of species, really helping out the curlew because they've so much against them. Predators, weather patterns, people with dogs, footpaths, a lot of disturbance. So we try everything we can, make the public aware, and yeah, it's been a real success story.
In this area, in a square kilometre survey, it's quite possible to find 10 nesting pairs. In the south of England, we've only got about 250 pairs of curlews. But if you think about what's really happening is, in my lifetime, the population of people has doubled. The urban sprawl is one of the things. We all still need to eat, so we need to rely on the farmer to provide the food. They're spreading out. We've had an increase in predators, and restrictions on what we can legally control. And then there's also a media campaign to try and criminalise the gamekeeper, which has then led the public to go out and damage the traps illegally. So that's had a knock-on effect.
John was teamed up with Darren of the Yorkshire Dales Moorland Group. And together they helped to find the appropriate nests, monitor them, gather the eggs and incubate them before transporting them to their new home to hatch.
I got involved in the Head Starting project as a result of being the administrator for the Moorland Group and being in possession of the bird surveys that the Gamekeepers have done for the last several years. I was in charge of the initial incubation process. What was quite surprising was how fast we managed to find the curlew nests. And I think that was largely down to the skill of the gamekeepers and the field work that was employed, but also the number of curlews that were on the ground, and harvesting them from those sites, provided they were compliant with the Natural England licence. That went very successfully. The incubation went very successful. We exceeded the target set by Natural England on successful hatch rates. Transportation was an issue, but we overcame all the problems, because by necessity the way that the project would have to proceed would mean harvesting the eggs from the Dales area, incubating them up to a point where the developing embryos were sufficiently advanced to withstand the journey down to Sussex, which was a 7-hour trip. I just felt like we were doing something really worthwhile, something really beneficial, the conservation of the iconic curlew. Very inspiring project to be involved with, and I'm grateful to have had a hand in it. Needless to say, the final stage of the incubation were just as critical, and they were somebody else's responsibility.
And that somebody else was Charlie Mellor, head keeper on the Arundel estate.
So just here to show you a bit more of what's going on down here in Sussex. The eggs obviously started their initial incubation up north and then travelled down in a purpose-built incubator. And then when we got them down here, we put them in different batches in these incubators. We went with the Archon Pros as recommended by Natural England. We had to apply for the licence from Natural England, and we couldn't do a thing until we'd got that licence. It had certain conditions on that we had to abide by, one of which was very detailed record keeping. It's just run you through a bit of what we're doing here in the incubator/hatching room. Hygiene is very important. So with the egg stage, one of the jobs we do is obviously to weigh the eggs each day. So we take, these are the only 3 eggs that we've got left now. Everything else is either in the hatcher or out in the field. So you can see the code on here, A91. So the first thing we're doing is looking for signs of chip. Then we take it to the scales just to check that it's following that 15% weight loss. The other job we're obviously checking with the incubators is that there's enough water for humidity. Once they start chipping, they move into the hatcher. So the eggs go in these little trays and they go on something called hatching foam, so that when the chicks are hatched, they don't get what's called splayed legs, which can lead them to have a bit of a disability. See here we've got A53 has hatched, so we write that down on here, hatched on the 24th. So next, we dab their umbilicals with iodine, just to make sure there's no infection. So this one's A53, and that just guards against infection. And the next job is to get the rings on. They'll keep these ones on when they're chicks, and then as they get older, they'll get their proper adult rings, so that in the wild, when they fledge and go into the wild, ornithologists will be able to identify them. And then once they've got their rings on, they go here into the drying incubator. And this one runs quite a bit colder and a really low humidity, and it's just where we put the chicks for the first few hours. Once they're dry, then they go in under the heat lamps. So we keep all the eggshells. And the reason being is that there is some thought that maybe wild curlew are having a problem with egg thickness, or shell thickness rather, and some scientists will check them to see whether this is actually a problem or not. So once the chicks have got to 5-6 days old, we move them out to the outside rearing pens, and I'll just show you the first lot that have come out here. So these guys are about 5 days old. We'll give them more and more room as they get bigger. So they'll start with a 20 by 20, and then we'll give them a 20 by 40. And eventually when they're a few weeks old, they'll have the whole run with the longer grass, which should have some good insect life and whatnot for them. They'll be finally released at about 50 days old, so just over 7 weeks. And they'll go into some outside release pens. When they're old enough and ready to fly, we'll open the gates and off they go.
Finally, after months of hard work, it was release day. The current method of release is to move the young curlew from their rearing pens to another enclosure at the release site. After they settle for a day or two, the front of the pen is removed and everyone stands back. and the birds are allowed to leave in their own time. We all stood back on the horizon, waiting for the birds to make their way out. Eventually, one curious curlew walked out of the pen, took flight, and performed a big loop around us, calling as it went. This sight and sound was something to behold. An actual curlew over the South Downs. Over the next hour or so, the other birds found their way into the world. And the reintroduction had taken its first step.
It was pretty cool. Nerve-wracking at first, but we got the eggs down and the fertility was very good, and we managed to hatch 37 out of 40. And from then on, it's been a steep learning curve, but yeah, it's been very exciting, and you know, touch wood, gone pretty well. So we've learned quite a lot along the way. Protein levels in the food, we had problems with 2 birds, which is called angel wing, which is caused by too much protein in the food. So we'll know for next year to reduce the protein at sort of a week old. We had a couple of wry necks, which is just, you know, a thing that you get with all birds. One of the most worrying times was when we had a big thunderstorm. Went out middle of the thunderstorm thinking we're going to find curlews heaped up in the corners like you would pheasants and partridges, but actually they were all out there preening, enjoying the weather. They're a lot hardier than game birds. It's been a big team effort. My wife's helped a lot. The boss has been interested from day one, obviously, and paid a lot of attention to it. The wider team, the beekeepers, they've fed, watered them, and done all the husbandry work with me as well. So touch wood, it's all gone pretty smoothly. We would think that we probably won't see any of these birds until 2024, and then we're just hoping that one sort of day in March or April, or you know, when they come back, that we'll be checking a trap or, you know, doing what we do, and we'll hear that classic call of the curlew, and we'll know that it's been a success. That's what it's all about, restoring a breeding population to the Downs. And like I say, when that day comes, we'll know that it's worked. I think most people that have reared any birds, whether it's pheasants, partridges, could do something like this. You know, the same principles apply. There's nothing, it's not rocket science, it's just good husbandry and you know, stockmanship really.
Well, this was a logical extension to our general nature restoration project, which we've been having down here for the last 20 years. It started with Dick Potts coming into my office and saying the wild grey partridge would become extinct on the whole of the South Downs unless we did something. And I think I said, well, it's not going to happen on my watch, Dick, we're going to have a try. And we've gone from then only 10 grey partridges to over 2,000 in a good year and a shootable surplus. And of course, that's a wonderful driver, you know, so the grey partridge is now safe. We've done the same with lapwing, we've done the same with, you know, yellow hammers, you know, corn buntings, etc. And a whole host of flora and fauna. And this was just a wonderful logical extension. It's red listed. We have something like 40% of the remaining Eurasian curlew on this globe here in Britain. And, you know, elsewhere it is just as threatened as it is here. And numbers have been going down and down and down. Grouse moors, the driven grouse moors, are keeping the curlew going. Unlike Wales, where they're almost extinct, unlike Ireland, they're almost extinct. And south of Birmingham, there are very, very few curlew successfully breeding. And we can't just sit back and rely on the northern grouse moors. We've got to get curlew going again here in the south. It's been a wonderful team effort. It means an awful lot. I personally believe, this is just my personal view, that what's going to kill mankind is not global warming per se. Global warming is a terrible problem, but what's going to kill mankind way before that is nature's complete collapse. I think the tipping point of this is not 50 years away, but 10, 20 years away. We're starting to lose natural pollination in China, we're losing it in California, and we really are in an incredibly critical situation globally. And we in Britain, we like to think of ourselves as great nature lovers, nature revivalists. We're actually the worst performing country out of the G7 global group for nature's revival. We're terrible at it. And quite frankly, this is an enormous wake-up call to all of us. We've got to start doing something. We've got to try things. We can't just sit back and say this is terrible. We've got to actually start doing something. The big risk here is whether the curlew will return to breed in 2 years' time. But there's only one way to find out, and that's to do what we've done. And fingers crossed, they just could do it. And to hear the sound of the curlew here on the South Downs will lift an awful lot of people's hearts.
It's early days for these sorts of projects, and the success will only be truly measurable after many more years of hard work, research, and investment. What is clear is that if we do nothing, the curlew population will continue to decline, until all that is left are a few island populations in the uplands where the land is well managed for biodiversity. I, for one, want to see these beautiful birds flying over my home on the south coast. And more importantly, I want my children to experience that too. And this is why these projects are so important.